Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on our online LLM and Master of Studies of Law programs at Lewis and Clark, both of which focus on environmental, natural resources, and energy law. We're delighted to speak with those of you who are here with us live in this webinar, and also to any of you who may be listening to this recording later. We should say at the outset that all of us here on your screen are delighted to speak with you individually about any questions you might have about the fit of these programs for your personal and professional goals. And so we're going to throw a bunch of information at you today, but I wanted to just say that up front, that we are happy to have individual appointments so that you can really discuss again the fit of these programs for you. I'm going to do a few introductory slides, and then we will focus on one of our really amazing classes that we offer in this program, and then we'll talk a bit about some logistics. So with that, let me tell you who is here with you today, who the presenters are. I am Janice Weiss, and I'm the Associate Dean and Director of the Environmental Program here at Lewis and Clark. In that capacity, I oversee the LLM and MSL programs and the JD environmental programs. And I could not do that without the amazing assistance of our Assistant Director, Tess Jacobson. Tess is really the key liaison for our MSL and LLM students and a wonderful resource for anyone who would like to chat about the program. And then Delia Weedman, also on your screen, is our program coordinator, and she can also help answer questions about application details and those kinds of things. So the three of us are the staff for the environmental programs. And then we have joining us as our special guest today, Professor Dan Rohlf. And you'll be hearing from Professor Rohlf in just a few minutes. Professor Rohlf teaches in our in-person programs and has for over 3 decades. And he is considered one of the nation's preeminent experts on natural resources, public lands, wildlife law, endangered species. One of his great areas of interest, and he's really woven this deeply into the fabric of his scholarship and classes, is the intersection of law and science. Dan brings his perspectives as a geologist turned lawyer to the field and to his classes and his work. So you'll get to hear a bit about one of his classes here in just a moment. Professor Rohlf is also happy to serve as a resource if you have questions about the curriculum or the program as well. So now let's just talk a bit about sort of the macro view of our online degree programs. And I'm sure that most of you know, but just to be very clear, the LLM degree is for folks who already have a law degree. That would be a JD from a US law school, or the equivalent from an international program. So somebody who already has the degree necessary to practice law, whether that would be, again, internationally or in the US. The MSL, or Master of Studies in Law, is for students who don't necessarily want to be a lawyer or practice law. They are more interested in policy work or lobbying work or legislative work. And they would find knowledge of environmental and natural resources laws very helpful to their professional development. And again, we can talk at any point about types of careers, types of jobs that both types of students seek and get. But just to make clear what different degrees are. And we'll talk a bit more about qualifications and all of those things to apply. But again, LLM is for folks who have a law degree. MSL is for folks who have an undergraduate degree and want to pursue this program. So our general approach is we have basically taken a curated list of the classes that we offer here in person on our campus and put those online with pretty much the same professors that you would get if you were taking the classes in person. The classes are asynchronous, meaning that you can be in any time zone, anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, because you will be listening to lectures from the professors that are recorded. And so within certain time frames that each professor sets, you can watch the video for the lecture on your own time, whether that's in the evenings, in the mornings, on the weekends, again, within certain time frames that are set. But it creates this wonderful flexibility in that you don't have to be in a place at a specific time. And with each module, and Professor Rohlf will give you some examples of this, there's reading, there's a discussion question or a quiz to make sure that you're engaging with the material along the way. We really like that part because just listening to videos is fine. We're all good lecturers and we like to do that. But of course, it's way more interesting and dynamic for all of our students to be able to interact with the material and with fellow students. And so we have these discussion questions along the way, quizzes along the way, and we have found that really helps our students make sure they're getting the material and engaging, even though they're in all different parts of the world. The program is also incredibly flexible, and we'll talk a bit more about this later. But not only are we offering the cutting edge curated list of classes that we think are really important for future environmental advocates of any type, but you can also take one class at a time if you have a very busy work or family schedule or other obligations. You can choose to take one class at a time in any given semester, or you can take more if your schedule allows and you want to get the degree in a faster time period. And you can also flex. Some semesters you may want to just take all the classes we offer and really devote yourself to that focus. And then perhaps in the next semester, you need to dial it down. So that's another highlight of our approach to this program. We often get asked, what about access to professors? What about talking with professors since we're all over the country and all over the world and not on campus? And all of our professors are very good about if you want to have a one-on-one Zoom meeting, phone call, all of that is definitely something that we support and make sure happens. Many of our professors also hold regular office hours by Zoom, and you can drop in, and we often record those for folks who can't go in person. And I won't get into all the details, but other resources on our campus, such as career services, are definitely available to our online students. So we like to mention that so you know that even though you're not here necessarily on our campus, we hope that you will feel part of our community and know that you have access to the resources here. And so that can all fit within your existing personal and professional responsibilities in that regard. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Professor Rohlf, and he's going to talk a bit about one of the classes he teaches in the online program, Natural Resources Law and Science. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Janice, and hello to everyone either listening to us live or watching the recording. I teach at least two of our current offerings in our online program, as well as contribute to a third class, which is our emerging topics class. And I'm a fairly frequent lecturer in that class as well. So yeah, I've been involved with our online program from the very beginning, and actually even our LLM and MSL programs from the beginning. And I really love to work with our online students. One of my goals is to make all of our online students feel like they are truly Lewis and Clark students, because I think that's really important. So I try to do whatever I can to engage with people online and make them feel part of our Lewis and Clark community, because I think that is important. And to kind of underline what Janice said, that's the way we look at our online students. You guys aren't just out there somewhere, but you're important part of our program. And we try to go out of our way to treat our online students as such. So Janice, if you want to maybe go to the next slide, um, I'll talk a little bit about one of the online classes I teach. It's my natural resources law and science class. Um, as Janice noted, I have a science background. My undergraduate degree is in geology. I became very interested in biodiversity issues and federal laws dealing with biodiversity, like the Endangered Species Act, when I was in law school. Another thing I did in law school actually was take a science class. I took conservation biology from one of the founders of that particular field of science, and that was a really important thing that I did very early on, obviously, in my legal career. And I really felt that I was bringing two really important components together, because I've been developing an expertise in federal laws dealing with biodiversity. But I was sort of really looking at half of the picture. I was looking at the legal aspects of managing and conserving biological diversity. And then I realized when I took the class on conservation biology, I was really bringing kind of the other half of that equation together. I was looking at the science of biodiversity, how species behave, how ecosystems function. And I recognized that if we are attempting to create standards to adequately manage or to protect and restore biodiversity imperiled species, we really need to know how those things work from a physical, from a science perspective in order to regulate effectively. And so that really kind of galvanized my interest in trying to bring together and better integrate the fields of science and law and in protecting and managing natural resources. So that's kind of the basic idea behind my class, and it's been reinforced over the years as I've both worked in the field itself. So in addition to teaching academic courses, almost 30 years ago now, I co-founded our domestic environmental law clinic, which is called the Earthrise Law Center. And wearing that clinical hat, I have participated in a lot of um, efforts to try to improve management and protection of biodiversity and endangered species. And so, even from a very practical standpoint, I have been a participant in real life efforts to better protect biodiversity. Also, as part of my academic work over the years with my colleague Janice, for many years, we taught an Endangered Species Act course to federal officials, especially with the U.S. Forest Service. And so we were able to interact with many people working for the federal government on the ground, trying to implement these federal laws that require specific actions to manage and protect biodiversity. And hearing their experiences and interacting with them again, convinced me of the importance of thinking how we integrate and how we can better integrate law and science in managing and protecting natural resources. So that's really the foundation of my natural resources law and science class. And I aim that at lawyers, but I also aim it at non-lawyers, especially working with people in the real world, working for as managers, and not being lawyers, but oftentimes, managers in the Forest Service or biologists in the Forest Service, for example, we ask them to, in a sense, be amateur lawyers. And so scientists and managers need to learn more about the law, and lawyers need to learn more about science and management. And that's kind of the philosophy behind my class. And over the years, I've looked a lot and thought a lot about better integrating law and science. And so that's kind of the starting point for my natural resources law and science class. And we kind of look at that from a theoretical standpoint, but also always with sort of a practical gloss. And we look at three, what I consider kind of fundamental aspects of integrating law and science. First is what I call the standards challenge. For example, if we are going to say that a species is endangered, what does that really mean? How do we distinguish an endangered species from a species that's not in danger? And how do we effectively describe what that boundary is? And is that a scientific question? Is that a policy or management question? Is it sort of a mix of both? We consider those issues in the class. Second of all, we look at what I call science process, which is even if you describe what an endangered species is, for example, um, and you describe that standard, how do we then decide whether a species out there in the environment, whether the species meets those criteria to be endangered? Um, do you use specific models? Do you ask specific people? Do you require peer review of science before making that determination? What sort of process do scientists actually use? And is that just a science decision? Do scientists or a management agency just get to decide that by themselves, or is that in part a policy decision? And we look at aspects of the law where sometimes the law prescribes a process, sometimes it doesn't, and we look at the challenges inherent in that. Then we look at implementation on the ground. Once we say how we're going to do something, how well do we actually do it? And what if we gain knowledge, as we're almost always doing in the field of biodiversity, for example, as well as most other fields? Our scientific knowledge is growing, and when that happens, how do we change management? How do we modify decisions that we've already made? So we look at issues of adaptive management, for example, in looking at implementation. After that kind of grounding, we jump into a little bit more of the natural resources law part of the class, where we look at biodiversity law and policy, like the Endangered Species Act or protections for migratory birds and marine mammals. So we examine those federal statutes that provide for the management and protection of those aspects of biodiversity. And drawing, as I noted, I have both a kind of a theoretical and academic as well as a practical background. So drawing on that and drawing from our amazing environment here in the Pacific Northwest, we go on a field trip. And how do you do that online? Well, we actually had a professional videographer accompany me in taking a class to Bonneville Dam. Bonneville Dam is the lowest federal dam on the Columbia River, one of the largest rivers in North America, and just kind of in our backyard here in Portland. But Bonneville, every single salmon in the upper part of the Columbia River Basin, which is an area about the size of France, has to swim past Bonneville Dam, both as adults going upstream to spawn and then as juveniles going migrating to the ocean. And so that's kind of a focal point for long-standing controversies about managing those dams and their impacts on the salmon. And so I use that as kind of a focal point to discuss real world aspects of both the science and the law, looking at management of salmon, water resources, and in turn, huge economic resources like hydroelectric power here in the Pacific Northwest. And we do that in a module with a virtual field trip where you'll sort of be at Bonneville Dam yourselves. Then we look at some broader issues like non-regulatory strategies. How can markets or payments for ecosystem services potentially be a tool for better management and conservation of those natural resources? Um, we also take a look at scientists and ethics and advocacy. So, for example, there are huge debates in the scientific community about to the extent to which scientists themselves should advocate for certain policy outcomes. And we examine some of those ethical and practical issues. And then finally, at the end of the class, we look at what are increasingly sharp 21st century challenges. So, for example, should rivers or salmon have rights? Um, can we accord legal rights to natural resources? And if we do that, and a court is looking at the rights of a river, how can a court adjudicate those rights? Who speaks for a river, for example? That's a real cutting edge area of law right now. Those sorts of cases are being filed throughout the world, actually, including here in the United States. For example, many of you have probably read about groups of young plaintiffs, children filing lawsuits arguing that climate change compromises their future and they have a right to a clean and safe environment. And that courts should vindicate those rights. So we talk about that at the end of our class. Janice, if you want to go to the next slide. I think, especially now, this class is a very timely one. Um, Certainly, there are huge changes going on at the federal level, as well as at the state level in our country, which bring natural resources, climate issues really to the fore, sometimes not in a way that's really favorable, I think, in tackling some of these problems, but it's really important, obviously, to recognize what's going on and to think deeply about that. Between the Biden administration and the Trump administrations, we've seen huge swings back and forth. And one of the things I try to do with my class is adjust our class readings, our class discussion questions, kind of on the fly to reflect the latest in what's going on from a policy standpoint. I also do things like when we have discussion questions in class, and people do that on their own and post those and also respond to other students' discussion posts. What I will do is go through all of those discussions, and then I'll do a video that responds, kind of gives my take on what people in class said, as well as my thoughts on the discussion question. So I record that every week that we do a discussion question. So you'll be hearing from me in a recorded sense, in the lectures in the class, but you'll be seeing a video that I made that directly responds to the students in class. And that video, can be minutes old, if you want. But also, as Janice earlier noted, I have I try to do live office hours sessions, as well as provide people with an opportunity to speak with me directly if they would like to do that on a one-on-one basis. And so, in addition to the recorded lectures, I try to make myself as available to online students as I am to people who are here in Portland and can walk into my office. Um, I also try to emphasize, as I've said before, kind of the practical effects of what we discuss. I think having that real world grounding is really important. I don't want to just talk about theory. I want to, sort of look at what's going on right now in the real world and make sure that our academic discussions have that grounding in the real world. And with the challenges of climate change, the political changes we're seeing right now, I think that's particularly important to keep our grounding in what's going on right now. When we talk about implementation, for example, in this class, boy, that's changing dramatically right now. We see federal funding for science, for example, drying up in a lot of cases. We see implementation of biodiversity protection statutes really changing. In the Columbia River Basin, for example, the White House issued a presidential order that affects the operations at Bonneville Dam. And so, the things that we talk about this class were literally subject to an order from the White House just months ago. So I think things are pretty topical and immediate, and I try my best to keep them that way in the class. So with that, I'll give it back to you, Janice, and if people have questions, I'm really happy to answer them at the end.
Great. Thank you, Dan. That was super useful. We have this slide to give you just a sense of when we're talking about an online classroom, what does it look like? And these are multiple pieces here. Obviously, you wouldn't have all of this in your particular class. But as I mentioned earlier, each module, which is a segment in our language for the online platforms, we have a lecture, a pre-recorded lecture. And by the way, Dan mentioned this with regard to his field trip, but our video lectures are recorded by a professional. So that's really helpful because you have generally good lighting and good microphones and good quality. Old school online education was, sticking a microphone in a classroom and expecting that to be, easy to comprehend on a recorded side. We do, of course, do Zoom recordings to supplement, as Dan mentioned, things change rapidly, particularly these days. So you may have some Zoom recordings where we realize something just happened out of the White House or the Supreme Court, and we're going to do a quick Zoom video. But really, this slide is intended to show you, sort of the graphical look of our online classes.
Well, and Janice, just to emphasize that that's dynamic. So,
Mhm.
in my class, you don't just look at my face
Right.
for an hour. Well, most of the time I'm actually there, but the background is changing. Key points are listed on the slides, and all of that is professionally produced. It's not an amateur operation.
Right. Yeah, I think that bears repeating because we're sure that many of you in this webinar have experienced online education of varying degrees of quality, probably both high and low. And we decided to start, our programs years ago with, as professional of materials as possible. Tess, did we have another slide on this before you take over? I think we've covered this. We mentioned the quality. I will just add something about the class discussions both Dan and I have mentioned. Um, it has been really impressive to us to see how thoughtful students' responses to our discussion questions are. Obviously, all of you have been in the education model for years. In-person classes, right? They're fabulous. They're engaging. They're lively. So we can't quite recreate that sense. But the difference is you have an opportunity to sort of carefully craft a response. You can edit it. We don't want you to write an essay. We don't want you to feel like it's got to be perfect. It's intended to be a substitute for answering a question you might be asked in class. So it's not intended to be a heavy, burden. But it does give you a chance to type an answer, think about it, modify it a bit if you want. We know, for example, that introverts, who maybe aren't the kind who are going to be raising their hand in class and answering questions, appreciate that. But we've also found that everybody really likes that opportunity. And then you will have a chance to see what your classmates said in their response. You put your post in, and then you can see everyone else's. And what has impressed us is the really thoughtful responses that classmates give to each other on their responses. They can even disagree, of course. We encourage that. It's a very lively field. But certainly, it's always very respectful, and you feel heard, even though you're all in different time zones. So I think that's important to mention. Um, so with that, I think we'll turn it over to Tess for some information.
Thank you all. And yeah, and please keep submitting your questions in the Q&A. We'll get to those as soon as I talk a little bit about the program requirements and things. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about how, if you are interested in the program, if you're interested in this natural resources class, how you can get involved and start filling out your application and things. So we do require 26 credit hours. So for example, Professor Rohlf's natural resources class is 3 credit hours. So that will equivalent of about what most of our classes are in the program. So the 26 credit hours is for our LLM and MSL degrees. International LLM students are required to take 28 credit hours, and that's because you will take a 2-credit Introduction to Environmental and U.S. Legal Studies course, which I teach, and that will just introduce you to U.S. law school, kind of what to expect, how to approach law school classes, things like that. That is a requirement for our MSL program, so it's built into the curriculum for the MSL degree. Other required courses for both programs are the 2 core classes, Administrative Law and Environmental Law, both foundational courses to your work in environmental policy and environmental law, because most environmental law in the US is going to be administrative law. So many of the programs that Professor Rohlf talked about is administrative law programs. So that will be a very core class. Environmental law is going to give you an overview of a lot of the major programs in environmental law. You'll get an introduction to things like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, RCRA, all of that, that are core principles for environmental law in the United States. LLM students are also required to take 2 semesters of emerging topics, which is a really wonderful course taught by Professor Weiss, and that is going to be a great class that's dealing with up and coming current happenings in environmental law, both for domestically and internationally. And it's a really fun class. You write a blog post during your class about any environmental topic that you like. So it's a really great chance to dive deeper into an environmental topic that you are interested in or that's maybe specific to your geographical area. Students really love their class. It changes every single semester. So it's a really great class to take to get an inside view on what the current happenings in environmental law is. I already mentioned the introduction to U.S. environmental law and legal studies that's required for international and MSL students. And then administrative law is not required for international students, but we do strongly recommend it just because it will provide a really good base in your other classes as well. Really fun thing about our program too is that you can take up to 8 credits outside of the environmental law program. So we also have an online animal law program, or if you want to do a semester or a year in person in our on our Portland campus, you can take up to 8 credits outside of the program. So some students might want to take a different class in a related field, or like I said, maybe one of the animal law classes or something, and you're allowed to do that and have that count towards your degree requirements. If you're ready to apply or thinking about applying for our online LLM program, you do need to have a law degree. So that can either be from an accredited U.S. law school, so that would be your Juris Doctorate or your JD degree, or for international students, that's usually an LLB or its equivalent, essentially a degree that would allow you to take the bar exam or to practice law in your country. We also require that you have demonstrated an excellent academic record. So we're going to be asking for your transcripts from your your law degree granting institution. And so usually that is demonstrated through your transcripts, but you also may have work experience or something as well that's demonstrated. I'll get a little bit more into the details on another slide with what we look for in the application. Strong legal research and writing skills is really critical because you will be doing a lot of writing. It is more law school classes. So a lot of final exams, papers, and things like that will require strong writing. Another fun class that you have the option of taking is what's called an individual research project, which you can do for 1 to 3 credits. And that is a deep dive research type paper, anywhere from 10 to 60 pages, depending on how many credits it is. And so that's where that, legal research and writing skills come in really handy for classes and for projects like that. And then the most important part is having a genuine interest in environmental, natural resources, or energy law. So we're really going to be looking for that in your personal statement and things like that. This program is strictly focused on these areas of law, aside from those optional 8 credits outside of that. So having that genuine interest, knowing how, what you want to use the degree for, what you want to transition to will be really critical in your application. Important to note that actual bar membership is not required. So we have international students who maybe aren't barred. We have people coming straight from a JD program who maybe haven't sat for the bar yet. So actual bar membership is not required. You just need to have graduated from the institution. For our MSL program, similar, but you obviously don't need the law degree. So you need to be graduate from an accredited U.S. or international college with a bachelor's degree. So that will be a bachelor's of science, bachelor's of art. We aren't looking for a specific degree at all. I will say we have a lot of STEM majors who come into the program. We have a lot of science degrees, but we also have a lot of arts degrees as well, or people who are maybe working more on communications and things like that. So any degree is totally fine. Again, we're going to be looking for that academic record and strong analytical and writing skills. We recognize that you probably haven't had that legal research background or anything. We'll be teaching you those skills, so those aren't required for the MSL program. But you do need a strong writing, and you'll represent that in your writing sample that you'll submit. And again, having that genuine interest in environmental, natural resources, or energy law is going to be really key. An important thing to note about the MSL degree is that you do not need an LSAT or a GRE, so there's no standardized test to apply to the program. So just keep that in mind. It makes it a little bit easier to apply, a little bit less expensive. So some details about the application requirements. So there is an online application form that you can find on our website. I think Delia linked to the program pages. So you will fill out that form. It's going to ask you for all of the information. And then some of the other components to the application is you will have a statement of interest. This is going to be where you represent that genuine interest in environmental, natural resources, energy law, kind of talk about, what you think the degree, how you think it will help you, what you maybe plan to do with it. Not everybody has their career planned out. That's totally fine. Just a general idea of how you plan to utilize the degree is great. We're also going to ask for your resume. So this can be a traditional work resume that you'll submit along with your application, outlining your work experience, education, volunteer, anything that you think would be helpful to us. And then your JD LLB transcripts if you're applying for the LLM program, or your bachelor's degree transcripts if you're applying for the MSL program. For the purposes of applying to the program, unofficial transcripts are completely fine. We don't require that you pay for official transcripts when you apply, but if you are admitted and matriculate as a student, at that point, we will ask for your official transcripts from these institutions. Other important thing is 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. So we require 2, but we accept up to 3. These can be academic letters of reference. So if you are a recent graduate or still have contact with professors from law school or undergrad, it's always great to see an academic letter of recommendation. It can be from supervisors, whether that's work supervisors or volunteer supervisors. What we really look for in these letters is people who can speak to your abilities to be successful in a graduate level program, but also maybe who can speak to your writing skills or your research skills or your analytical skills, skills that are important in a law school program. MSL applicants are also required to submit a writing sample. This does not have to be environmental in nature. Oftentimes, it's maybe a paper that you wrote for undergrad or a recent writing project that you did. We ask that it be about 5 to 7 pages, just something that shows your writing skills are at a graduate level of writing, that you're able to maybe defend a thesis in your paper, things like that. We've also had science papers and things like that submitted as well. So again, it doesn't have to be environmental in nature, but something that just shows your writing skills. International students will also need to show proof of English proficiency. This is usually through the TOEFL or the IELTS scores, but we accept other means as well. So if you graduated from an undergrad institution that was taught in English, that would be acceptable. Or if English is one of the official country or official languages of the country where you live, that's acceptable as well. So definitely talk with us if you don't have an IELTS score or a TOEFL score, and we can figure out what other means there might be for that. A few next steps. So our priority deadline or our application deadline for the spring semester is coming up. It's November 15th. Our classes start January 7th in the online program. So your complete application, so all materials have to be submitted by November 15th to be considered for a January start. We usually get decisions out within 2 weeks of receiving the application, and then with the November 15th deadline, if you apply for a spring start, it'll be a pretty quick turnaround, and then we'll ask for a decision pretty quickly so that we can start getting you set up in our system if you decide to start with us. And then if you are a U.S. student, we encourage you to submit your FAFSA or your pre-application for federal student aid if you are applying for federal aid at all as soon as possible. You do not have to be an admitted student. You don't even have to have applied yet in order to submit your FAFSA. You are able to submit it, and you're able to put Lewis and Clark's FAFSA ID, which is available on our financial aid website, into the application so that as soon as you are admitted, we're able to pull that report and get you a financial aid offer as soon as possible if that's something that you are looking for. If you're not quite sure if you're ready to start with us in January, that's completely fine. We do offer online starts in January, May, and August for both the LLM and the MSL programs. And we accept applications on a year-round basis. So depending on when you apply, as long as it's before that deadline, you can start for the next term. But we're also accepting applications for summer or fall right now as well. So you're able to specify which term you would like to start in. Admissions happen on a rolling basis. So again, once you receive your complete application, it's usually about 2 to 3 weeks, and then you'll receive a decision from us, if not sooner. And we offer one-on-one counseling, so you're welcome to set up an appointment with myself or with our other program member, and we're able to help you with any advice or anything that you have about your application, any questions on how to best curate your best application, and we're happy to meet with you and also just to answer any questions about the program. So if you have questions about the classes or about the program or the time, we're happy to answer any of those questions for you and meet with you one-on-one. And with that, I think we're going to start taking
Yeah.
questions.
And there's some really great questions in the chat. And Dan, there's a couple that probably are good for you, but from Bill W. I'm going to take a few of them if you want to take a look at those. We have a couple of questions that I'm going to tie together with one answer, and then I'll break off and get more specific with some of the questions. We do want to mention too, and this may answer in part the questions about application of what you're learning in the classroom. Someone had a question about how much does our program get into international issues, for example? And where might we take maybe what you're learning in Professor Rohlf's class and bring it into an actual ecosystem that you're interested in working in? So I want to mention our concept of externships in that light. Um, it's the law school term for basically internships, but it's an opportunity for MSLs and LLMs to work for an environmental organization or government entity in hopefully in your backyard or remotely if the placements are allowing that. And I mention that because for some students, that is a really remarkable addition to the classroom work. You get credit for the time that you're working at the placement. You're obviously building fabulous resume experience and developing your professional network more fully. But I think it also really helps with the application part, applying, what you're learning to a particular workplace. So I wanted to mention that we have that as an opportunity even for our online students. So that may help with some of the questions. More specifically on international, we had questions about that. And we offer classes that deal directly with international issues. We offer a class called International Environmental Law, taught by our international environmental professor. So obviously that's fully focused on international issues. In addition, other of our classes definitely discuss and have to discuss international aspects. Dan teaches a wildlife law class that, of course, talks in part about CITES, the International Trade on Endangered Species, other international issues that are important there. In my emerging topics class, many of the modules are on emerging hot topics happening in other countries or on the international stage. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the international flavor of many of our classes.
Yeah, and Janice, just to jump in
Yeah,
for a
yeah.
second, even in my natural resources law and science class, most of the law itself that we talk about in that class is United States centered. However, at the same time, I think especially the theoretical construct of, what I was talking about, the integration of law and science, um, that really doesn't have any boundaries. And
Mhm.
so, I think a lot of the issues that we explore in the class have relevance outside the United States, relevance and importance outside the United States. And, so for example, in discussion questions, I welcome people who take sort of an international perspective on those sorts of questions. And I think it really adds a lot to our discussion.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think you'd be well served if you were coming, beaming in from another country when we have many international students all over the world who contribute, their perspectives. So absolutely a great question about the international. We had other questions about how does the program like the MSL differ from sort of maybe more policy-oriented grad programs? It's a great question. And the biggest difference is you are in a law school setting. So we are teaching you law, the hardcore law, and the policies that underlie and inform that law. But our lodestar is the law. So the biggest difference is you are reading legal case books, law review articles, and supplementary materials, just like our law students do. And obviously, as an MSL student, we're not expecting you to be a lawyer. That's not your goal. But you will get a very thorough grounding in the actual laws. You'll be reading the laws, you'll be reading cases. And we think that really has been a tremendous asset to MSL graduates who then are going to go out and work in an advocacy position or in a legal liaison position, to have understood the law and the policies underlying it, we think is a really good skill. But you're in the class with lawyers and really getting that lens. We have also found the MSLs thrive. They thrive in this classroom setting. We didn't quite know how it would all work with LLMs and MSLs all in the same classroom. The MSLs are crushing it. They're doing great. So it's obviously kind of a nice environment, and it's nice for the LLMs to have the MSLs in the class who are coming at them from very different and varied experiences. So I hope that answers some of the questions. The one other question I'll answer, and then Dan, if you want to jump in on any of them, or Tess, we had a question about opportunities for small group work and interacting with students other than the discussion post responses. And we do have those opportunities. They're not formalized only because so many people are on different time zones and they have different obligations. You know, some folks are raising a family and working full time and doing this program. Some of the classes have small group work assignments that certainly allow for Zoom calls amongst the participants in the group. We also have social, we call them virtual happy hours and coffee hours. And we really try to provide those opportunities for the online students to meet in real time. And we try to have those at different times of the day throughout the year so that hopefully everyone in the varying time zones could go to at least one of those. So just to answer that question. Tess, Dan, any of the other questions you want to?
Well, on a somewhat related question, Janice, when you were talking about, like who participates in the classes, that sort of thing, I did see a question about do we welcome older students? I think my response would be a resounding yes. Um, Many of my favorite students, or quite a number of my favorite students over the years, in our online program have indeed been older students. And I think those students, bring even more life experience to our classes. And so we very much welcome older students, and I think they add a tremendous amount to the classroom. One of my recent favorite older students um, uh, just got a job, in fact, working with Mono Lake Committee, protecting Mono Lake in California near Yosemite National Park. So we have many examples of our grads and our participants as being older students. And then just looking at some of the other general questions, I don't know if we'll have time to answer all of those questions, but for example, in my class, do we look at things like traditional ecological knowledge from indigenous people? as science? The answer is, of course, yes, but looking at, and I think it really depends, and it's changing as well. So when I talk about science process, for example, what types of science or what types of methodologies do agencies or should agencies use in managing a particular resource? Certainly, that question of traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous communities' knowledge and experience, that is certainly an important type of knowledge that agencies could use or perhaps should use. But in implementation, we look at those changes. So, for example, the current federal administration, I think, is probably much less open to broader, or one could say diverse perspectives, because that very word, of course, diverse or diversity, has been something that the current administration has really kind of attacked in a sense. So yes, we definitely look at those sorts of issues and how they've changed over time in my class.
Great. And then I'll just note, Bill W., you have some really terrific questions here. We should probably set a time and chat with you, because I think you have some really interesting questions here. And in fact, the questions, since you have a science background, remind me a lot of some of the things that Dan mentioned earlier about the intersection of law and science. And so I think you'd be really interesting to talk to further about that intersection. It also reminds me of something Dan said about the training that he and I have run for the Forest Service and other federal agencies on the Endangered Species Act. They were mostly Forest Service biologists. Um, and, we had a lot of interesting discussions, because what is a good or sound decision for a lawyer may not be the same as what is a good or sound decision for somebody with a science background. And we would try to help navigate, what is it that a court is going to say about this? What kind of evidence can you use in environmental cases, right? So trying to navigate the complexity of the way lawyers and courts and judges look at things versus someone working in the field was always a very fertile conversation. So you've good points in here for sure. We just have a couple of moments left. Tess, do you see anything that we are missing? Again, sorry if we can't answer all of your questions in detail. We would be delighted, as we've said, to meet with you one-on-one and talk through any other questions that you have. So I think, Tess, anything else?
I just briefly wanted to mention, talk about one question that asked if we teach students how to like public comment and things. And it's actually something I cover in my intro course, where we go over how you get a chance to look at public comments on federal regulations, and I show you how you can comment and stuff. So it's something that's done in the intro course, but it's also something that is incorporated in other courses as well.
Great. Thanks for answering that. Well, thank you all for being here with us and for your questions. And for those of you listening to the recording later, we certainly hope that you'll reach out and that we get to see many of you in our classrooms soon.